Hi, this is Russ Taff.
Hi, this is Steve Taylor, and you're listening to Between the Songs podcast.
Welcome to Between the Songs. This is Chris Marchand. I'm here with my friend Joe Cook, and we are really excited to be able to, in some ways, reboot this podcast. It's been a while since you've heard from us, but also to share an amazing interview. We had the chance this week to talk to Russ Taff and Steve Taylor, two legends of the music industry. Russ Taff is currently doing a Kickstarter for a new album called Cover Story, and we got to talk to them both about it. And I don't know, for Joe and myself, this is a pretty big deal. Now, this has been a Rich Mullins podcast. We've talked about Rick Elias a lot, the Ragamuffins. Um, believe us, we are going to make a Rich Mullins connection here, and it's not going to be so hard, actually. At the end of the day, we got both of them talking about Rich Mullins, but this episode is a chance to talk with Russ about his music and about the direction he's headed with this new album, and hopefully that people will come along and support it. So, Joe, why don't you tell us, what are our plans for the podcast, the Ragamuffin Archive, your own radio show, YouTube show, Ragamuffin Archive Revisited? What have you got going on in your mind for the next year or so?
Okay, so folks who have been following Ragamuffin Archive, they may have noticed a lot of changes recently. I've been running the archive for a long time now, Chris. This January will be 15 years since we launched the YouTube channel. And, for most of that time, I have to be honest, it's been almost kind of like a glorified hobby for me. Just kind of this thing that I would do on the side. I'm pretty sure there were actually entire years where I didn't even upload a video or anything. But over the past year, I have to say that I've really felt a burden to kind of I don't know, do this right for a change and to kind of take Ragamuffin Archive a lot more seriously. I know that there have been countless people who have been touched by the content that we've been able to bring them. And so I guess I've been really wanting to try to do this a little more professionally and make new ways for people to be able to engage and build community together. And so for the first time ever in the history of Ragamuffin Archive, this year we now have a team. There are four of us, of course, yourself and me, and a couple of friends of ours, Hal Swift, Nate Eichelman, are on the Ragamuffin Archive team now. And we have been doing a lot of brainstorming and, a lot of stuff behind the scenes. We've been making some really cool plans, stuff we can't quite announce yet, but there is some really big stuff on the way. But one of the things that I kept going back to, and I know this has always been there for you too, is the Between the Songs podcast, because this was really a passion project that we started in 2017. And I think it's a project that always meant a lot to both of us. And it's always been sort of unsatisfying in that we just never really followed through with it for a myriad of reasons. We've kind of done sporadic episodes over the last few years, but nothing really consistent. And so a few months back, you and I started talking about relaunching Between the Songs podcast. And so, yeah, that's what this is. This is the reboot, the revival, but we're kind of bringing the podcast back. And, but when we were planning to relaunch it, we were kind of like, well, we need to relaunch it with something good, something big. And then we heard about this Kickstarter campaign that Steve Taylor was doing for a new Russ Taff album. And it was like light bulb went off like, oh, this is the perfect way to relaunch Between the Songs. We gotta invite Steve Taylor and Russ Taff on to the Between the Songs podcast. If we're going to relaunch the podcast, we've got to do it in epic fashion. And to our, I think, amazement and delight, they actually accepted.
Hey, we're thankful that they have a Kickstarter that they need to fund. I'm pretty sure somewhere along the line, Steve Taylor said something like, I'm more desperate than I used to be. So like, there you go.
Well, that's the thing. The reason we were able to get in touch with them and request an interview was that you had Steve Taylor's email address from like a decade ago, right?
I don't remember where I got it, but it was around the time when Goliath, Steve Taylor and the Perfect Foil came out. And I tried to do an interview with him, and it was just he was in I don't know, it was at a stage of transition, and he said no. And actually he said no, but he kind of answered some of my questions in the email. So I was perfectly happy. I got the most gracious no from Steve Taylor ever, and that was okay. That's kept me going all these years.
And so that's what we've got for you today. We have got this, I don't know, I think incredible interview with two legends. And I mean, really, this is like, I think you said this on Facebook or social media. This was kind of a bucket list interview for you, wasn't it?
Yes, Steve Taylor was, at least for me. And I want to get into that in a minute, just my own reminiscences about Russ Taff. But yeah, Steve Taylor would be kind of top of the list of I have some pretty famous people that I hope to interview someday, like Stephen Colbert and Sufjan Stevens.
Chris actually has a list. He showed me the list.
Yeah,
and there's one name crossed off on the list.
I have one name crossed off. Yeah.
And it's Steve Taylor.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, I have some famous like Andre Agassi, Roger Federer. I want to interview. It's some people I know I will never talk to. But yes, I was able to cross Steve off the list. And I think what's interesting too about Steve Taylor and Russ Taff, maybe Russ Taff especially, is how many of us have lived in this CCM bubble. And for me, going back and revisiting Russ Taff's work is growing up, I always had a self-consciousness that, Christian music just wasn't as good. And I it's like always this kind of like thing that's kind of pounded into you. Like, it's okay, but it's not as good, right? Where is there a vocalist like Russ Taff? Right? I mean, highest quality vocalist that there is. And there are some people in the Christian music industry, given different circumstances, they would be full household names. Russ Taff is a household name if you grew up in CCM culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I think is kind of interesting. And Steve Taylor too, like he was a genre shifting, kind of world shifting contemporary Christian figure in the industry where nobody knew what to do with this guy. And for me, like that resonated with me as a kid, right? So that's where, he's one of those first artists that I ever latched on to.
It's interesting too, because I grew up like we didn't really go to church when I was, growing up, but my mom listened to a lot of Christian music in the house. So we always had like, Amy Grant tapes and I remember we had a Brian Duncan CD in the house and we had a Russ Taff CD in the house. Very, very vividly remember that CD being around, my mom playing it. But like Christian music was never something that I was interested in. I didn't hang out with, youth group kids. Like I didn't have I didn't have any evangelical friends until I was about 15. So up till then, Chris, the only Christian CD, or I should say the only Christian artist whose CD I ever bought, that album turns 30 years old this week. And it's House of Love by Amy Grant. Was the first album I ever bought by a Christian artist before I was a Christian. I think this Friday that record turns 30 years old. All that to say, I had zero interest in Christian music till I was about 16 years old, more in the late 90s. And so it was always just sort of more this thing around me that I never really took any interest in. And so I remember the Russ Taff CD that we had in our house. It was his album, The Way Home. I think it was a 1989 album that he released.
Okay.
We had that CD. I remember that close up picture of him on the front of the record. Don't think I ever actually like listened to it as a kid, other than just kind of walking through the room if my mom was listening to it. What was your experience with that?
Well, see, so that's what's so funny about this is even though I grew up with Christian radio on all the time, what's been funny for me in revisiting his work is like going, oh, that's Russ Taff. Oh, that's Russ Taff. Oh, like I know all these songs. And it's just so funny. I don't know what it is. I think it's because maybe he was like a generation before me when he really hit. And then by the time that I would call like Sandy Patty, Wayne Watson was in a similar that era where Michael Card kind of where it almost didn't seem like my music. And so it was just a little bit before when we were coming of age. And so it was almost, too soon. And so then it was all these songs that were on the radio. The one that really comes to mind is actually one from the Imperials called Praise the Lord, which won the Dove Award for Song of the Year in like 1979 or something like that. And like when I re-listened to that song, it's not that I could sing every word, but man, it just hit me. Like it was just a song that I remember being played constantly on the radio.
To submit to earthly fears, don't let the faith you're standing in seem to disappear. Praise the Lord, He can work through those who praise Him. Praise the Lord, for our God inhabits praise. Praise the Lord.
And that's what's just funny about like Russ Taff was just kind of ever present, even though as a little kid I didn't quite know it.
Well, for me, as far as the Imperials go, it was obviously one of their huge hits, "The Trumpet of Jesus."
Okay.
And I didn't know that was Russ Taff when I first heard that song.
I
had what it was like, late 90s or whenever. I got a couple of those Songs for Life, compilations.
Oh yeah.
And that song was on there. And I got to tell you, man, for a minute, that song was my jam. I really dug that song and played it a lot. And it was a few years before I found out. I was like, oh, that's Russ Taff. Okay.
That's really interesting.
I listen to the trumpet of Jesus while the world hears a different sound. I march to the drumbeat of God Almighty while the others just wander around. I'm a member of the Holy Ghost traveling band. We're moving on up to a better land. I hear the voice of a supernatural singer like only those who know Him
can. And so here's the funny thing too, is I have to say, I'm kind of partial to that 70s vibe.
Yeah, me too.
Like there's I like that style. And so in the 80s, when he started doing solo work, that's when, like, you'll notice, what is his name? Jackson Joseph Puig. He was like a kind of like a keyboard master. He worked on a lot of Amy Grant albums. And so some of these same producers, Brown Bannister, Michael Omardian, a lot of these guys came on and helped him shift his sound. So like it's really night and day. If you listen to like some of those Imperial albums and then you listen to his pop solo albums, it's really quite a shift. And so it's just interesting.
Here I am, because you love me, willing to be broken. Here I am, because you love me, coming closer to you, giving you my will. Here I am, because you love me.
And those solo records are incredibly well produced records.
They're pristine. And so that's my other thing about Russ. And I actually do bring this up in the interview with him is not only did I realize, oh, he's been in my head since I was a little kid and I didn't realize it, but I don't think the guy has a genre. He's a shapeshifter. And what I mean to say is every time I hear his voice, he can fit it into whatever he's singing. And it's kind of amazing. It's kind of really, I mean, he sings with the Gaither vocal group too for a few seasons,
Yeah. So on your point about him sort of being a musical chameleon there, I decided to go back and listen to The Way Home. This record that was ever present in my house growing up. I really wanted to give that album a good listen. I had heard songs from it over the years since, as I became more interested in Christian music, but I wanted to give the album a good, proper listen. And you're onto something because when you say that, he sort of defies genre, the first track on that record is a song called Winds of Change. And immediately I was hit with almost kind of like a Mellencamp, John Mellencamp vibe.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah.
I've never gone so far that I've forgotten my way home. The best things always bring you back again. Over and over, the hands of time go round and round. They don't slow down when you lose your way. At every turn, the things you learn, you wear them proud like you wear your name. And as you go on down that road, don't let the dust get in your eyes. It blows in the winds of change.
But then we go to the second track, song called It Was Love. It's like there's this totally different groove. It's very almost like Robert Palmer.
Stronger than thunder, easy to pronounce. It didn't cost me a penny. It was love. It was love. Blinding light from above. It was love. It was love. I was looking everywhere, then I finally looked up home.
Really killer track. I mean, actually, both of them are great tracks. The third track, it's more of a much more adult contemporary sort of late 80s, early 90s CCM sound. Then we go on, then there's like a very bluesy, soulful track. And then we've got gospel, there's country, there's Americana, there's rock and roll.
Yeah,
By the time you get to the end of the record, you've been all over the musical spectrum. And he pretty much kills it on every single song.
Yeah. 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 And so that's what's been kind of cool. I actually listened to an album that I didn't really even know about. It's called Faroe Islands. I think it's from 2011. He's doing the same thing on that album. One of the songs sounded to me like almost like this could be a Broadway tune, but then the next one after that, it sounds like, kind of like roots blues, kind of Americana blues. And I was like, okay, it's like he's just doing whatever he wants to do and, knocking it out of the park in everything that's going on. You got a chance to see him live. Was that with the Gaither vocal group, or was it something else?
No, I saw him at a Gaither homecoming, which I won't get too much into it because we actually talk a little bit about it during the interview. But when I saw him, it was actually before he joined the Gaither vocal band. Okay. So he was just a guest performer at a Gaither homecoming event. Gotcha. I went with my parents in the early 2000s. And so I mean, and he was I believe he wasn't doing those for years and may actually still appear at those events occasionally. I think he does. And so, which is amazing, like really, when you think about it, that this guy, he, again, just defying genre, he can fit in completely perfectly in a Southern gospel, Gaither homecoming event, and then also just jam out with Jimmy Abegg and Peter Furler and John Mark Painter, at Jack White's club, in Nashville. and he fits perfectly into either environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is where this new album is going. Cover Story. We've heard a couple of songs, Joe. You and I have been able to get a preview, and I'm curious what's coming down.
That's bragging rights, I think.
It is bragging rights. John Mark Painter, and I don't exactly know all the musicians that he's been bringing in, but it's some really cool arrangements, and it's a mixture of well orchestrated and arranged kind of roots rock music, but also some raw stuff. And it's so interesting to hear Russ talk about it. So we hope you enjoyed this interview, and be willing to support the Kickstarter on Cover Story for Russ Taff. We hope you enjoy it.
Guys, thank you again for taking the time to talk with us. I got to tell you, I honestly don't remember when I have been this eager to back a Kickstarter campaign. And I got to tell you, Steve, a lot of that has to do with this awesome video. I mean, Kickstarter videos, half the time I just know I'm going to back the campaign without actually even watching the video.
Right.
But the video came up in my feed and it was like, I was hooked like instantly. And what was so great about it is your enthusiasm for this project just kind of screamed through the screen. And I think it was pretty infectious. Because now for Chris and I, all of our friends are talking about this project, and we were really stoked about it. And so I just wanted to ask you, though, for those who haven't seen the Kickstarter video, take us back to the beginning, where this all began, and that night, 2 years ago at Jack White's club.
Yes. Well, I've known Russ for a long time, back when, we were both touring and we did some shows together and we're friends. I actually stayed at Russ and Tori's house in Nashville while I was recording the I Predict album, and they were out of town. So I've gone through his drawers and so we had a long friendship, and we'd stayed more or less in touch over the years, but I hadn't seen him in a few years. I think we had gotten a coffee, I don't remember how long ago. Russ, probably longer than I think. But when it came time to do our band Chagall Guevara did a reunion show at the Ryman, and for people who paid an inordinate amount of money for the good seats, we felt we needed to do something extra. So we had an after party the next night at Jack White's club in downtown Nashville, the Blue Room. And we told the people that were going to be coming that we'd have some kind of a jam session and invite some special guests. And we invited Russ because, not only do I know him, but Lynn in the band had produced, one of his finest albums, his self-titled album. And Dave Perkins had written one of the songs on that album. And so it just made sense to have Russ come. And to my discredit, I had just assumed that Russ's prime singing days were probably behind him. And it turned out I was very wrong. Russ did a version of Charlie Peacock's Down in the Lowlands from that same self-titled album that just burned the house down. And it was like a 7-8 minute long performance. Jimmy Abeg, who was in Charlie Peacock's band, I think he just told Russ to go, I don't know, full Pentecostal preacher, right? And
we were there, and I wasn't going to do it because Charlie and I were supposed to do it together,
right?
And so I was just going to stay and enjoy the music and backstage with you guys. But Jimmy said, "Well, let's do it, and we'll just do it more blues." And of course, when you've been doing this as long as I have, if you fall on your face, it doesn't matter, So anyway, I don't know if we rehearsed it or not, but
I don't think so.
I can't remember rehearsing, but of course with that band, my gosh, that band was just so incredible. And so they were throwing solos back and forth. And I was just standing up there and kind of moving around and then throwing a solo here and throwing a solo there. And Jimmy Abeg said, "Russ, do something." I said, "What?" He goes, "Get out there and do something." I I said, okay. And I got out there and just started, and I kind of started singing a little bit, and then turning into a Pentecostal preacher singing. And it was just one of those things you can't duplicate. But I don't know. I'd never done anything like that before. But it was just incredible. Just incredible.
Well, it really blew us all away. And afterwards, the band that backed him up was Jimmy Abegg and Peter Furler on drums and John Mark Painter, all from the Perfect Foil. And then we had Lynn Nichols and Dave Perkins from Chagall Guevara. And we were all kind of of the same mind, like, whatever Russ just did there, he needs to do an album like that. So another friend of ours who was there agreed, and he decided to put up funds to have Russ record an album that would, the idea was to channel that same kind of energy and interest that Rick Rubin brought out of Johnny Cash in the American recordings. And, one thing, I know all the guys would have loved to be involved in the project. I just also know from experience that when you get that many people in a room, things take 5 minutes as long as they do otherwise. So John Painter especially had a very specific idea of what he thought Russ needed to do, because John had gone to the same church as Russ for many years. And so he would hear Russ sing in church on Sunday. And he was a fan going back to when he was like a 14-year-old. So he had belonged to Russ's records. And so Russ and John and I got together and started talking about what songs would be interesting, and came up with I think a really interesting mix of cover songs, everything from Prince to U2 to Depeche Mode to Duran Duran to Dylan to Grandma's Hands. Who wrote Grandma's Hands, Russ?
Bill Withers.
Right. And just came up. And then I had another friend who suggested a worship song, All the Poor and Powerless, and another friend of ours who had written a song, Andy Gullahorn, called I Will, which we all love, and just started working on it. And I was the executive producer, which I'm not sure what it means, but it means that I drop in every once in a while and see how things are going. And but John and Russ really worked together over a long period of time, and just recorded Russ in a way that we haven't heard him before, which is really up close in the mic and really present. And I love this. It's easy for me to communicate enthusiasm because I love this album so much. I don't know if I've ever been this excited about a project, and I just want everyone to hear it. So that's why I started a Kickstarter. I don't know if I don't think Russ would have done one on his own, but I said, let me run with this. And a lot of the reason for the Kickstarter, even though the record is done, is I want to put together a team to take the project to a broader audience. We hope all of Russ's gospel fans will get it and enjoy it, which I think they will. But I think it's an album that a lot bigger audience needs to hear. And so that's why we're doing it.
Well, first off, thank you for you answer. I don't know if you noticed, but Chris and I, our eyes lit up when you said "I will," because right before we got on with you, we were having a debate on whether or not the "I will" that we saw listed was the Beatles or Radiohead.
Oh.
And it turns out it's Andy Gullahorn, who I think we both love. Andy Gullahorn's like tremendous. So,
yeah.
Russ, I got to tell you, when you guys were talking about the concert that night a couple years back, I was thinking back to a memory I had when you blew my mind in concert, and that was years ago. I mean, I was probably 20 years old. This was probably the early 2000s, maybe 2001 or two. And of all places, it was, I went with my parents to a Gaither homecoming concert.
Right.
Which is not like, my mom loved the Gaithers and it was always on in our house. And so I had an appreciation for it, but it wasn't, particularly my style of music. So I went in expecting to enjoy myself, but I was not expecting to have my mind completely blown. And then, we were pretty close. It was at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. This was a big arena. And this guy comes off the stage running like a madman through the crowd and just singing his absolute head off. And you absolutely brought down the house. I never forgot that night. Just an amazing performance. And it was like, okay, that was the night I learned that Russ Taff could really just kill it in any venue with any audience.
So let me say this. Let me interject. So, Steve, you kind of had me at American Recordings Johnny Cash.
Uh-huh.
And what I'm interested in, Russ, related to that is I was revisiting some of your albums. Actually, can I show you one? Can I show you one of your albums?
Sure.
Here? Remember this one?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. See this on the back?
Yeah, our Saturday Night Live fever outfits.
Yeah, I showed
John
my
Travolta.
Exactly. That's funny, John Travolta. I showed my 15-year-old son this, and he's like, "That's the most 70s thing I've ever seen." That's what he said today. He said. But then there's this. This is a cool photo too. This iconic photo right here on the Metals album and stuff. So
right.
In revisiting your music over the past week or so, you don't really have a genre. You go wherever. Like your voice just fills that space. What I'm curious about, what is your thoughts? Like, have you ever had an album like this before, recorded in this way? Is there something about? Am I getting the kind of Americana bluesy vibe here that maybe we haven't heard before? What can you say about that?
Well, John and Steve both know my voice. And let me just back up about this, him downplaying this executive producer role. He would come in periodically. We had long meetings before we went in. And but Steve was just kind of on top there looking, and he would make comments here, make comments there. And then John and I would take it and put the nuts and bolts together to make this record. But let me just say this too. Steve Taylor, in all my years in Nashville, and there's been a lot of them, is the most creative person I've ever met. Just the way that he viewed things, the way that his mind works. And he's always outside the box. I don't think he's ever been in the box. But with the way he approaches stuff and just the analytical part of who he is and what he is, to think like a chess match, like three moves ahead of where everybody else is going. And this is my first time to actually work with him. And I am just set in amazement at his talent and what he does and how he does. And he's got 14 irons in the fire. And he's just constantly moving and creating. And I got to see was it Tuesday? No, last Friday, right. Whenever it was, Friday. Steve be the musical director, the professor, influencing hundreds of young musicians, singers at Lipscomb University. And I got to see him in that role of this mentor that's teaching all these young people their craft. And I was just thinking how fortunate these students are to have someone like him, of just because he sees the best in things. He can look at a situation, like he heard my voice and he saw what it was. But with this record, he and John, I've been known for just screaming, most of my career. I've just been screaming, but with this record, they began to experiment on the lower part of my voice, which has not been used hardly at all through my career. And with the way it was produced, and the mic is so flat and in your face, that it took me a while to get comfortable with that, because there are certain, over the years, I like certain mics, preamps, but they didn't want that. And I was like, okay, I like all this stuff, and it was like raw. And a lot of the stuff singing I was doing, the tracks were like John playing piano and a drum, drums and maybe a bass, whatever, but it was just bare and sparse. Now I'm used to, over the years, I like everything in the headphones, but this was just empty. And so I wasn't leaning on anything that I could just kind of lean on with the band, the tracks, and all of. I mean, the horn player or whatever that I've toured with for so long. But it was just me and a microphone, and sometimes with that sheet of paper in my hand, getting comfortable with the lyrics, and I would say, okay, I'm learning. I want to come in tomorrow and do it again. John would go, no, let's leave it alone. Let's leave it alone. He'd play it for Steve. And it was a record. I just had to surrender, to just, okay, to do something I've never done before, which is so exciting. A guy that's been doing it as long as I have. And for the way that Steve and John approached this project. And I tell you, there was one time I just had a meltdown. I don't know if I can deliver what they're looking for because it's way outside my comfort zone. And, I was having a really hard day. And Steve promised me, he said, Russ, I won't let you embarrass yourself because I was so outside of my comfort zone, the way I've been making records for all of these years. But I don't know. I just laid back and trusted and, reached way down deep and sang. But these song selections are just so, I don't know, they moved me. There were times with some of these songs in the studio, I would just have to stop singing and tears rolling down my face. And I don't know, it just, something happened on the inside of me doing this record that it just made me appreciate what was going on around me and trusting these guys and letting them direct me. And John is a great vocal producer. Vocal producers, they know when to step in and kind of maneuver you this way, and they know when to stay out of it. And John was that way. And so he got some great vocals out of me. He just let me be me. And if there were little tweaks here, little tweaks there, but something happens when you trust. And I'd never worked with them in the studio before. And in that studio, it gets real intimate. It's just you and music and another guy. And I don't like anybody to look at me while I'm singing. All the years I've been singing, I always have some kind of buffer between me and the control room. And so just to be able to feel these songs and sing these songs and to feel them well up inside of me, to sing a type of lyric I've never sang before, but it's powerful. The message is powerful. And every song at the bands that Steve mentioned, these lyrics will move you. I mean, I was singing this stuff and going, my God, that's the truth. My God, that's real. That, I would love to say that from a secular point of view, that everybody could understand, not just Christians. You know what I mean? I'm kind of rambling on here, but it's been such an honor to work with Steve. It really has been.
Yeah, Steve, anything you would want to say in terms of like how we're going to hear a different side of Russ?
Yeah, he managed to bring something else to some of these songs. And no disrespect to the original artist, but in some ways he made these songs his own. And I think in more than one situation, like made the definitive version. I think of a song like Demons by one of my favorite bands, The National. And I love that song and I love the way they do it. And they do it in 7/4. But Russ turned it into a soul song. a song by Prince called "The Cross." The way Russ's voice takes that song over, and the way John produced it with Scott Mulvihill on a stand-up bass and just a really slow build, turns it into something epic and yet absolutely personal at the same time. I love U2's "When Love Comes to Town." It's U2 and BB King. Russ just did something else with it in a really interesting and beautiful way. I Believe in You, the Bob Dylan song from the 70s. He did the same thing with that. Oh man! And then there's a song that we don't actually know who the author is. It's in the public domain. It's "Tear This Building Down." It's also known as "Samson and Delilah" or "If I Had My Way." And that's the song that leads off the album.
Samson and the lion got in a tag. Samson jumped on that lion's back. You read about the lion, he killed a man with his paw. Samson got his hands around the lion's jaw. He ripped that beast till the lion was dead, and the bees made honey in the lion's head. Well, if I had my way, if I had my way, if I had my way, I would tear this building down, tear this building down.
And I feel like Russ's version is the one the only version I'd ever want to hear, even though it's been covered by Springsteen and Bob Dylan and the Grateful Dead and Peter, Paul and Mary. I just think Russ made the version that is going to stick. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm a pretty big enthusiast when it comes to this album.
Russ, one of the things that I thought that was interesting that you just said and was a little surprising to me was when you were kind of talking about the hesitancy to sing in front of other people, because seeing you in front of an audience, like, you really seem to be energized by other people. Is there something about the intimacy of being in a studio where it's just a couple guys that makes it harder for you? Because I just don't see that when you're on stage.
It's two different things completely. When I'm in front of an audience, I'm a performer. I know how to move an audience, but when you are just trying to create something in the studio. And my mother told me when I was a kid, working with me about singing, she said, "Son, when you sing, reach way down deep, because that's where the anointing is." And I've always been that way. If somebody sees me in the control room and I'm singing and they're watching, I perform. I know somebody's watching me, but if I'm cocooned and I can just close my eyes and go to that place that's just real and creative and honest, it's a whole different animal to allow that to happen inside of you. It's just so much different than standing in front of an audience. But there alone, nobody's seeing you, and so much of the times my eyes are closed, and I'm just in my world. And when I'm like that, I can create so much better and come up with new stuff, different stuff for me when I'm alone in that vocal booth. That makes sense?
Absolutely, yeah. You know what, Russ, we've got to talk about this interview that you just did, Soft White Underbelly. I mean, this is just an incredible interview. And, for a lot of folks, I'm sure, in, gospel music fans and contemporary Christian fans, they very well may have been familiar with your story. You released a documentary a few years back. But I think we were all kind of shocked and thrilled to see you pop up on the Soft White Underbelly. Before we kind of get into that interview, how did that come about?
Well, our friend Troy knew the Mark Latha is probably one of the greatest photographers in our country, and talked to him about maybe shooting a cover for him, and it was out of his friendship that he said that he might do it. But our friend told him a little bit about my story, and he said, "Well, let me interview him also." Um, and so the interview was I don't know. I told it like I do in an AA meeting. That's the way I told the story. Not to the church and not to Mark is one of the spirit. He's very spiritual, but I don't think he's a Christian. And he was in front of me with that camera. I mean, away from me, like 10, 12 feet away from me. But I was just telling my story to somebody that I felt like needed to hear the gospel. And I wasn't telling the story to anybody else but to him. And I didn't want to put Christianese in it. It was just real and raw, like I do in front of when I speak to AA groups and things like that, where there's no Christianese. And it's not one and done. It's a struggle, and it's a long struggle, and miracles take a long, long time. But I found myself just the world going away. And I'm talking to one guy down there about the miracle that happened to me and what Jesus did in my life. But I didn't do it for Christian folks. I was shocked that many actually watched that channel because it's just pain and hurt. And when I finished, Mark said, "That's the reason I do this." He said, "Your story shows them a way out." Well, almost all of my stuff, it just shows the hurt and the pain at the underbelly of our society. But I tell you, I just felt God in that room. And, AA folks, starting back in 1987, I learned a lot of choice words. There's a lot of language at an AA meeting that you wouldn't find in First Baptist Church. But, I just talking to him and feeling the witness rolling out of me of telling a guy that I didn't know if he was a Christian or not. I didn't think so, but I wanted to tell him about the miracle that took place inside of me. And it's not a pretty story. It's not, it's pain and it's hurt and abused by the church and Christianity, and how I found my way back, and how, the alcoholic years and what they did to me. But, people say it's raw and real. And that's the way I would describe it, because there was no filter. I had no Christian filter, had to run all my words all through this filter, to make sure it would be accessible to the Christian marketplace.
Yeah, that it wasn't going to air on 700 Club next week, was it?
Yeah, but it has it's been viewed over 400,000 times now, and so many of the wonderful comments of people. It's affecting their lives, Christian and non-Christian. Even Christians are thanking me for my honesty. But I don't know. It was just a God thing that happened, and the photo that he took is just. It's just stellar. I think I even look good, and I hate photos of myself. I've never looked at. I let people take. They pick the covers. I can't stand to look at my face, but that photo, it just told a story, and it was the way Mark had the ability to, with light and everything else, just to capture the pureness from the story that you're telling. But anyway,
is it going to be the album cover?
Yes.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. I'm just curious what you make of this, because I only heard positive things from this, but at the same time, I'm a kid that grew up in 80s CCM, 90s CCM.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, man, we're in a new era in the Christian industry, because this would have been a scandal. But and Joe and I were talking about Christians can handle some things, but we can't handle the swearing, right? But I've only heard positive. I was crying along with you, Russ. I love AA stories, by the way.
Right.
I just find them so inspirational. I loved hearing it. Anyway, I don't know. Do you feel like we're in a new era of the Christian industry? We just moved past this stuff.
My goodness. Yeah. Tori, my wife, she reads the comments, and our friend Troy reads the comments, and they kind of stand on top of the pulse of what's happening out there. And they said maybe only 1% of the people commenting had a problem with the language that I used, but it was those people that screwed me up in the first place. If they don't like my language, well, at my age, I enjoy poking spiritual cows. It's like I don't know, but 98% of the responses have been very, very positive from Christians.
Yes.
But it's a different era than it was. You remember what it was like back then. I'd lost my career.
I remember very well. Yeah.
For me, I'm one of those, guys who's just, faith has never particularly come easy to me. And it's always been a fight and a struggle. And then, like evangelical culture can be really depressing, as you know. And when I see things like that video, it reminds me why we keep fighting and what Christ can actually really do in one life. And it was so moving to me. And there were things that you said that really stuck out to me. You talked a lot about guilt and shame. Yeah. And I have wrestled with guilt and shame since I was 6 years old, and still do to this day. And sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but it's been a constant in my life. And when you were talking about even like the earliest memories, my childhood, certainly very different than the childhood you described. But I started thinking about how some of my earliest memories are really negative memories and how they've just sort of imprinted on me. Like the very first thing I can remember in life is at 3 years old, just cutting my hand by accident with a razor blade. And that's the first thing I can remember. And then I started going, things from, 4 and 5 and 6. And I was a sensitive kid. I'm a sensitive person. And so I've had those moments over the years where when you talked about not being able to look yourself in the eyes, in the mirror, and that self-loathing, just looking at yourself, that's been, I've had that exact moment you're talking about, and it's been such a struggle for me. And so what I wanted to ask you, all that to say, you said at the end of the video that this by no means is it all gone, that it's still there. But it's different than it was, when you were, really struggling, and when you were really struggling with alcohol and smoking and all of those things, but it's still there. And so what I wanted to ask you is, when those voices do return and you hear those voices that say, you're not good enough, how do you respond to that now, like in comparison to how you used to? How do you deal with those things as they creep up on you in your life today?
Well, I have got this whole big toolbox with a lot of tools in there now to fight this stuff, because shame, I can go into shame in a heartbeat. I get triggered or something happens. You're a grown man, but you hear your mother say your name and you're 14 years old again, and you feel guilty about something. But no, shame has followed me, and it still follows me at times. And it can be triggered by you just get blindsided by it. But now what happens? I have this whole speech in my head that I immediately go to. When that's triggered inside of me, that shame and self-loathing and all that, there's scriptures that I just say to myself, because what I've learned to do is to view myself through his eyes, not even my eyes or the church, but view myself through his eyes and how he sees me. And that changes everything. When you start seeing yourself the way God sees you, that he holds nothing against you, you repent, he forgets everything you've done, and you get to start clean every day. and when I mess up, it's just like, Jesus, forgive me. Just forgive me for going to that spot. I've worked for years for you to pull me out of that hole, and I'm not going to stay there if I get triggered by something. But I don't know. For me, when I really begin to fill those bad memories with good memories of forgiveness, and I'm the righteousness of God. I mean, he gave his son just for me. He gave his son. And I think, I don't know if I told it in that thing or not, but I have a dear friend that we've walked through a lot of shame and stuff together. And he told me one time years ago, as I was starting to fight this stuff, starting to get a handle on this, he said, Russ, if God had a wallet and Peter walked up to him and God would reach for that wallet and he'd say, Peter, let me show you my boy. And his wallet would fall open and your picture's right there. It's like my picture's in God's wallet. First thing you open up his wallet and there I am. That's how much he loves me and cares about me and forgives me. And I will never get it right all the time. I mean, I'm better. It's like in AA, we said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I was. And I'll still be fighting this stuff when I cross over. But every year I get better. Every year I get better, and I still do stupid things, and I still get triggered and blow up. But I've learned how to recover quickly. And man, you just have to have something when that hits to pull it away and put something else in its place, because there is years and years and years and years and years of conditioning of that stuff, and it just takes a long time for it to begin to change inside of you. But anyway, I've got some tools now that I didn't have way back then.
Steve, I'm wondering, looking at the Kickstarter, I can't remember what it was. It was sometime last week you released a snippet of the song "Tear This Building Down." Well, where do we go? You're kind of in the second half, I believe, maybe, or you're getting there of the Kickstarter. What can us fans look forward to? I know we often talk about the rewards after the top, but right now you need to meet the goal. So I don't know, any insights you want to share?
No, it's off to a really good start, and I'm confident we'll make it. There's a lot of vinyl involved, just because part of the thrill of this album is just the sonics of it. Is just hearing Russ's voice and hearing the tracks that John built with some really fine musicians. And then we had a longtime friend, Matt Wallace, who was a ace producer and mix engineer, everything from Faith No More and The Replacements and the first, and in my mind, the only good Maroon 5 album he produced. And then he has also gotten involved in Dolby Atmos mixes. And if you've ever sat in a Dolby Atmos room and heard a Dolby Atmos mix, it's like a whole different listening experience. So he and his partner in Dolby Atmos, Will Kennedy, mixed the album in Dolby Atmos as well. And Russ got a chance to hear it in their studio at Sound City in Los Angeles, and it was an experience like no other. I think, right, Russ? I mean,
oh my gosh,
yeah.
I don't know what word to use. I want to say blown away, but it was more than that. I was just I was overwhelmed with sounds from the record that I hadn't heard, because when you listen through little speakers, all that John did and the intricacies, well, you know what I'm saying, of it. But when it was on those speakers, you hear every little cymbal sound, bell sound, whatever, and I was amazed. It was amazed. It like take this, and it makes it just something like that. I mean, it was a spiritual experience for me, because the music, it went to a whole different level than I'd ever heard it. But yeah, Steve.
You get a little bit of the sense with headphones, but there's nothing like being in actual Dolby Atmos.
Oh my.
And so what we're going to do is with one of the things in the Kickstarter is we're throwing a listening party in a Dolby Atmos room for people who want to sign up at that level, and it's going to be a blast. It's going to be in Nashville, probably sometime in October, and I just can't wait for people to hear it. They've started doing listening parties like this for big albums. Pearl Jam did one in Los Angeles a while back, but part of the fun is you're listening to an album in a way that you've never heard it before when you listen to it on a Dolby Atmos setup. And it's the room we're looking at has 60 discrete speakers distributed.
Oh my gosh.
The walls and the ceiling of the theater was built especially to be a Dolby Atmos room. So that's one of the things we're looking forward to, and it'll be a fun time. And we'll have some, guests there as well, and some of the people that played on the album, and it should be a party.
I've never heard sound that good from anywhere. I've never heard sound that good to where you hear every little thing on a record and it feels like it's a mile wide.
Right.
I mean, my little speakers at home, but with those speakers, I mean, it was like an ocean. It was like, my gosh.
Matt played us. He played us a couple of mixes that he had done in Dolby Atmos recently. He did Foreigner's Urgent, which I love that song from when I was a kid. And hearing it in Dolby Atmos, it was like a whole different experience. What else did he do? B-52's song Rome, and he played that for us, and it just like came to life like in a whole different way. So to have him mix the album and then do it in Dolby Atmos, and I got to say, Matt didn't know anything about Russ Taff. And I've never heard him this excited about a project. He just started calling me randomly saying, "Who is this guy? And why have I never heard of him before?" And he flipped out over Russ's version of People Are People by the Depeche Mode and started sending it to other people unsolicited, just like friends of his in the industry. You got to hear this guy, and you got to hear this track. So that was a nice confirmation early on that we were onto something.
And that just so humbled me. To have a guy at that caliber that has been in the front of music, to say he liked what I did, I almost cried. It was like that guy, because that guy knows what he's talking about, and he thinks I'm pretty good.
Yes, he does.
So we're different colors and we're different creeds. And different people have different needs. It's obvious you hate me, though I've done nothing wrong. I've never even met you, so what could I have done? I can't understand what makes a man hate another man. Help me understand. People are people, so why should it be you and I should get along so awfully? People are people, so why should it be you and I should get along so awfully?
All right, so you've sold us. When do we get to hear this thing? Because I mean, we're just excited.
Well, on the Kickstarter campaign, we're actually allowing everybody who signs up to get a download of the album before it's released to the public, and so that they can hear it first. And I just can't wait for people to hear the whole album. It's pretty extraordinary.
Steve, I'm just curious. You're at Lipscomb now. The last time I heard something from you creatively, you were on a trip. I think you were doing a movie. Was it Taiwan? Was it Hong Kong? Was that something you were helping a project? And I also know there's like a TV series. I'm just curious on where any of those projects are at.
Right. Yes, I have a unique position at the university. They give me a very wide, a long leash to do a lot of different things. And for whatever reason, they've decided I'm worth having around. So one of the projects is, I was able to convinced Mike Naraki to come, the co-creator of Veggie Tales and voice of Larry the Cucumber, and wrote all those great silly songs. And he's now on faculty with us. And his new animated series, The Dead Sea Squirrels, we just finished all 13 episodes. It is fantastic. It's really funny. So I became the producer of that series. I don't know a whole lot about animation, but I've been friends with Mike for a long time. And so that hopefully will be coming out later this year. It turned out beautifully. The movie you're referencing, my grad assistant in the film program had spent a year teaching English up in the mountains of Taiwan and used to tell me stories about that kind of fish out of water experience. And one day I said, you should put some of those into like a screenplay, just a couple of scenes. Let's see what it looks like. And she did, and I liked it. So I helped her develop it into a screenplay. And then Sony Affirm Films ended up funding that to the tune of $1.4 million. And we were able to shoot it primarily in Taiwan, where the movie takes place, but also a week in Nashville. And it starred Mackenzie Mosey, who played Rapunzel opposite Meryl Streep in the movie version of Into the Woods. And that one turned out really well. And then the one that I'm really excited about is a longtime friend and collaborator, Seth Worley, is a writer-director, and his debut feature is called Sketch. And it stars Tony Hale from Arrested Development and Veep, and Darcy Carden from The Good Place, and three adorable kids. And so it just got picked as an official selection for the Toronto International Film Festival. They premiering in like 3 weeks. And that'll be the first time anybody's seen it, and it'll be the first time that studio buyers and distributors get a chance to see it. So we're hoping that it'll be coming out soon as well. It's a really, really good movie, and so I can't wait for people to see that one as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, I have Russ's albums on vinyl. Steve, I have pretty much all of your albums on vinyl. Any chance Squint's ever going to come out on vinyl?
Yes, I'm under a lot of pressure from some friends in particular to get that done. So we've got a few things lined up in the meantime. Of course, Russ's project, and then Chagall Guevara actually filmed the Ryman show, and so that's actually done. And that is going to hopefully come out in a few months. But once that's all done, we'll get around to the Squint vinyl.
I'll do this. I'll do this. I know my Zoom emojis here.
Oh my God!
And you are going to be sure to call Chris personally as soon as news hits, right?
That'll be
of course.
Yes,
of course. That's one of the things on the Kickstarter is you can pay to get Russ to give you a call.
Right,
yeah?
Russ will actually.
call
you
that's right. And talk to you. And he's a good raconteur. So
oh man, that's great. That's wonderful.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you real quick, Steve, is that obviously earlier this year we lost one of the giants in the music industry, Steve Albini, and you made a record with Steve, and I just wanted to just ask you just what some of your memories of working with him were, and a little bit about that project.
Yeah, I have really, really made me sad. So the first time I worked with Steve was on the Chevelle album, which was on the label that I started, Squint Entertainment. That was a band that we signed. And it was a crazy situation because the band was three brothers, and they played like three brothers. They had a chemistry among them. And the guys showed up the first day of recording at Steve's studio, Electrical Audio in Chicago. And I'm like, where's Joe, the bass player? And they said, oh, we fired him last night. So the first thing that Steve did was start recording, guitar and drums with no bass. And he likes to record a band as a band. And so that was not a great way to get started. But for whatever reason, Steve decided after 3 or 4 days that I was all right. And so we got along really well. He ended up introducing me to Fred Armisen, who at that point was a drummer in a punk band. And Fred had just done this comedy video. He went down to South by Southwest and interviewed alternative bands and different characters. And I thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever seen. So I think I might have been the first person to pay Fred Armisen to make comedy, because we hired him to do Chevelle's EPK, appear on that, and then and host their album release party. So that was another great memory. Anyway, we stayed in touch a bit through the years, and his wife Heather did a documentary on Christian music called "Why Should the Devil Have All the Good Music?" that I helped her out some with. But then he was also a really big fan of Danielson Family and Daniel Smith, and so we got to do our Steve Taylor and the Danielson Foil EP with Steve in this would have been about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was my favorite experience I've ever had in the studio. It was like 6 days, I think we were there. He was in great form. He was just a little bit more easygoing overall, I guess. And for whatever reason, he really loved this project. And one of my favorite memories was we were 3 or 4 days in, and he comes into the studio one morning, and he just says, "I just want you guys to know, I don't know what I was expecting, but you guys are hitting this out of the park." And he was not someone who dished out a lot of compliments, and so it especially meant a lot. One of the things I loved about him is he was a guy who was really principled. I remember for Chevelle, I kept trying to get him to take more money because we were an independent label, but what he was charging us was like, I just didn't feel like he was charging us enough. And at one point he said, "Hey, Steve Taylor, stop trying to give me more money." Like, he was just, "This is what I charge, right? For an independent label." I said, "Well, we have money because we got this other band, Sixpence, that's, selling a lot of records." He said, "I don't care. That's the price." So, and he was the same. He was that way all through his career. He was just a really principled guy. And man, all of us who knew him miss him a lot. He was extraordinary engineer and just one of my favorite people.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been just, an absolute thrill for us to get to talk to both of you tonight.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited about this project. I'm so happy for you, Russ. I really hope that this record gets the attention it deserves, and I love that your story is getting out there to a whole new audience. And I'm just congratulations for that.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, like American Recordings, is this the first of 5? Is it? Is this only the beginning?
You never know.
You never know.
Who knows? Who knows?
Very good. Well, we're very excited to hear it. Thanks
Great.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
This has
All
been
right.
wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for your help.
Bye-bye.
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 Take care.
Well, we truly hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. It was a great conversation and, honor of a lifetime on both counts. Russ and Steve, thanks so much for your time. I want to throw your attention back to the Kickstarter. You can look it up. We'll have a link in the show notes, but it's called Cover Story. Look up Russ Taff, Cover Story, Kickstarter. They're currently getting close to around 2/3 of the way there, around 60,000 by the time we're recording this. We're also happy to say that we have another episode coming. There's a segment of our interview that we didn't release yet. And we talked about, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, is it the 30th anniversary of the pursuit of a legacy? Is that what it is? I don't do math.
Yeah, 30 years ago this year, Rich Mullins released the video "Pursuit of a Legacy," which was incidentally, of course, directed by who, Chris?
By Steve Taylor.
So how could we have him on and not talk a little bit about his work with Rich Mullins.
There you go. And so that's the Rich Mullins connection, and we're going to release that interview along with Joe and I's discussion about Pursuit of a Legacy. It's really a unique release. I'm wondering if people have actually seen it, because it's one of these things very similar when Steve Taylor, he actually, I have 2 VHS of Steve Taylor videos, and I don't have a VHS player anymore. And so sometimes these things just kind of get lost into obscurity. I imagine a decent amount of Rich Mullins fans have seen Pursuit of a Legacy, but there are some iconic videos in it. What are you counting up there?
I have 3 VHS players and 1 Betamax.
There you go. So you're good. I got to come over to your place. We'll watch all of Steve Taylor's videos along with Pursuit of a Legacy. But I also have Pursuit of a Legacy on DVD as well. And it's going to be exciting to talk about. These are honestly some of my favorite music videos of all time, but also some of my favorite Rich Mullins moments of him talking of all time.
And I mean, you know, if we're being honest, easily the best music videos that Rich Mullins ever released.
Yeah, easily. The ones that he recorded a little earlier on, you know, How Can I Keep Myself from Singing? Not my favorite. If that was even considered a real music video. So yeah, exactly. These are legit real music videos, and these are works of art, to be honest with you. And when I purchased it back in the day, I knew it was a Steve Taylor collaboration. So I was excited on 2 accounts, right? On 2 fronts. So anyway, excited to be able to share that with you all.
And I think, and I too, I also have it on DVD. And I was mentioning this to you earlier. I've actually never opened my DVD. I'm holding it right now. It's sealed. I'm going to crack it open for this. I have it on VHS as well. I actually think that I probably have not seen this video in nearly 20 years, though probably watched the VHS tape of it at least 100 times back in the day. So it's a release that holds a lot of meaning to me. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun to go back and revisit it.
Yeah. So sometime in the next couple of weeks, we'll be putting that out. Joe, anything else you want to mention about the archive?
I just want to mention that we do have a new website, and it's real easy to remember. It's ragamuffinarchive.com. And head on over to ragamuffinarchive.com. All of the past episodes of this podcast are there, as well as Ragamuffin Archive Revisited. And we're starting to put some new and different content up there. It's definitely worth checking out. And it's going to be the place to go to kind of stay up to date on what we're doing. There's info there. There's a picture of Chris on the site. Just hit the About tab, scroll down, and you'll read his life story. There's a lot of good stuff on ragamuffinarchive.com. I'm just saying. So, and we're also on Mixcloud now for anybody who likes that app. So the Revisited podcast is up on Mixcloud, as well as every episode of Between the Songs. And then, of course, you can listen to this podcast also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. You should be able to find this
all the
podcast.
Places.
Yeah, all the usual suspects.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be with you, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it.